Welcome back everyone to another episode in the watercolor series. Today we are going to be taking on one of these parrots. I took this photograph, several photographs at the Tampa Bay Zoo, and I really like the red against that green background, which creates really nice contrast, and we can really see some nice details on the feathers, but I'm going to fade some of that out. So we're going to start off with the tip of the day, and that is, remember that watercolors are kind of an extension of a drawing. So when you do your drawing, take your time. When I first started this drawing, it was way off. The proportions went way off. So I kind of stopped. I flipped the paper over. I slowed it down, and I took my time and make sure that I had a much better drawing before I actually started painting. Because remember, watercolors are see-through, so your drawing is not only going to guide you, but it's actually going to show up underneath your painting as well. Okay, so little overview. What we're going to be doing, the only areas that we really need to mask off is this white area here, this white part of the beak, and then this little white area right here. That's it. And then I may put a little bit of frisket there, just so that when I do the background, I kind of create that barrier. And I'm going to do the background the same way that we did the background when we did the orange grouper. It's a really cool effect, and it actually looks like there's foliage back there when you do the saran wrap, and I think that's going to work really well. Okay, so, and then it's just a matter of using the techniques that we've been learning to bring this out to the level that we want. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and set this up, and then we'll get started. So we have all this masked off. We are ready to get started. I have the saran wrap. For the background, I'm going to be working mostly with different types of greens. I'm going to keep it super loose, and I'm going to focus on this area. I'm just going to let it fade away. So first thing I'm going to do is wet the background. If I get a little water on the parrot, it's no big deal, because the frisket is there. When I start putting the colors on, it will create that little barrier. And I want to make sure that it's saturated. So the first coat, the paper absorbs it pretty quick. Here I'm not worried about right now. Okay. So I'm going to be using my 1/2-inch brush, and I'm just going to do some mixing directly on the paper. Got it right this time. I often say canvas. And I want to make sure, especially where the green background is going to hit the red parrot, I want to make sure that I have nice contrast there. I want to make sure that my greens here are really good. And this is super loose right here, what we're doing right now. So this is kind of a way to, it's kind of like a warm-up, I guess you could say, because you're not really worrying about being too precise. You just kind of like putting colors in and just have a little fun with it, really. And add a little bit of this yellow, let it mix. I might even throw in a little bit of the red, so that it gets kind of a brownish area. So just a little tiny bit of the cadmium red. Don't want to overdo, because I don't want things to start turning brown. But this is like foliage that's in the background, so we're not too worried about the colors. It's more of a setting. And here to top. I'm just going to let that kind of fade a little bit. And a touch more green there. Alright, just take the saran wrap, mush it all up. Mush it. This. Once you mush it, alright, you gotta allow those patterns to stay. So don't go taking this off too early. So you kind of get to see a little bit of what the patterns are going to look like. So if you think that they're too big, peel it up, mush it a little bit more, and then put it back down. But remember, once you put it down for the final time, then let it dry naturally. A little bit up there. Alright, so I'm just going to let that dry for a little bit, and then we'll take it off, and take the frisket off and start working on the bird. Alright, so that background turned out pretty good, but as you can see, I got a little bit of that dark color on the head, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to take my little Mr. Clean cleaning thing, oops, and I'm just going to remove a little bit of that. So, and I want to do that now before I go in with the red. And it doesn't have to be like pure white. I don't have to get the paper back to pure white, but I do want to lighten it up so that it doesn't do too much damage when we work with the red. Okay. Alright, I got a lot of that off. I didn't get it all off, but that's okay. Those little things there, we'll just try to hide them or camouflage them as best as we can. Okay, the next step that we're going to do is we're going to work on this portion of the head, the reddish part of the head. So if you want to get a true red, you want to make some of this cadmium red, and I'm going to put it right here, cadmium red light, and I'm going to add some of the crimson, the alizarin crimson, and I'm just going to mix them together, and they create a much truer red than either one of them separately. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and block in that area. When I get down to this area right here, I'm just going to let it fade, and then when I do the greenish part, I'm going to let it fade into the red and just kind of let them mix together. So I'm going to stick with my 1/2 inch, and this is a 1/2 inch flat, and I'm going to get it fairly close to that edge. And bringing it down on this side here. And then like here it's just broken, so I'm not going to get too precise there. Now I'm going to start with this mixture that I made up here with the cadmium red light and crimson. And I'm going to put it in kind of generous. Now the light source, based looking at my reference photo, is coming from the top left. So here and there, I'm going to add a little bit of the cadmium red light by itself. Now right here, you can't really see it right now, but there's a separation between these feathers and these feathers. So later on, I'll have to put in a shadow right here. And I'm actually going to put a tiny bit of purple on this mixture right now, just to remind me that there's going to be a shadow there. And I want to keep this nice and loose, so got a little bit heavy. Purple is a very strong color, so I got a little heavy with it, so I'm going to take some of it off. There we go. And then back to the red mixture, and I'm just going to put it right on top of the purple or violet. And then down here I just want to let it fade. Just let it mix in with the water and do whatever do whatever it wants. I need that same mixture on this side, right here. That is, need a little bit more crimson there, right in this area here, right up to that beak. Now this is still masked off, right, because that's the whitish part of the face, so I didn't take the frisket off of that area. And then, while that's nice and wet, I'm going to bring in some of the cadmium red lights. I might even add a little yellow to it. And that's the lights coming this way, so we want this part here to have just a little bit more brightness to it. Leave a little bit of white showing here and there, just to make it look even brighter. Then on this side, a little darker, and then after this dries, I may have to do a little bit of glazing to darken up certain areas, but I don't want to try to do all of that at once, because it'll just blend together, mush together, and it won't make much difference. So I'd rather do it while the paper is dry. There we go. Now while this area is wet, I'm going to be introducing just a little bit of this greenish color. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of the cadmium yellow and some of the phthalo blue, and I want it to be to the blue green side. So I want to make sure that I have enough blue in here to make that happen. So like right there, that looks like just regular green. But I don't want regular green, I want blue green. So add more blue. Yeah, that's a lot better. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, and for right now, I just want to do this little area right here. While this painting is wet. I'll do the more detailed stuff a little later. But I wanted to do just a little bit here, so that where the two meet, there's kind of a cool blend to them. There we go. And then, just take my brush with just a little touch of water, and really all I'm doing is touching the paper, barely moving the paint. I'm not trying to like smooth it out. If anything, I'm trying to create a little bit of texture. Okay, I'm gonna dry this up, and then we'll move on to the next part. So there's a little bit of a puddle here, so before I put the hair dryer on it, I'm actually going to take that out, otherwise the hair dryer will push the color where I don't want it. Okay, I'm going to dry this up and I'll be right back. Okay, so what I'm doing now, there's areas of this right here that need to be dark, and then some that need to be light. So I'm kind of going around the light ones, and I'm putting in the slightly darker ones first. And I'm just doing this with dry brushing. So there's very, very little paint on my brush right now. And I'm just kind of letting some of the texture of the paper show through. because I'm kind of like letting this fade. And I want to go just a tiny bit darker underneath these feathers, just a little bit. And I may have to do a little glazing afterwards. Especially to indicate, in order to give some thickness to the feathers, I have to show shadows underneath the feathers. And I think that's going to be done, it's going to be easiest done with glazing. Okay. So now while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and take the frisket off the face. Right. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to separate the beak from this part of the face right here. And when I took the frisket off, as often happens, some of the pencil lines came off as well. Not a big deal. Now, make sure you get all the frisket off. Sometimes it's a little stubborn. So there was a little piece right there, and if you don't get it off when you paint on it, it'll resist. And then there's a little white area here. So this part here, there's a shadow. Then there's some bluish green here, bluish gray, excuse me. And then this is bluish gray to dark. And then you have these feathers. They're like the greenish feathers here. Okay? So I think I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush. I'm going to go with the round brush. This is the number 10 round brush. And just going to mix up a gray color, and that is burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. There we go. So this will be the first layer, and then if I need to, I can go back in and add a darker layer. So here there's a shadow, or a mark, it's not a shadow actually. And then there's a dark area there, markings on the beak. And I'm going to kind of stay away from that area that's going to stay white. And it's going to come this way. And then this whole area here is relatively dark. So I'm going to block this in and then come back in later with some more color. Needs a little bit more blue. It's a little too brown. There we go. And as long as it's dark, and I've mentioned this in some of the other videos, especially with watercolors, it doesn't have to be like a perfect match. So you don't need like a pure black or pure this or pure that. You just want to get the idea of what it is, whether it's light or dark. And then this part of the beak, the tip of the beak, there's a dark area there as well. So I'm going to stick with this brush right here, and then this comes up and it just fades like so. The rest of the beak is white in the picture, but I know, since the photograph is, or excuse me, the light source is coming this way, that since the beak is a cylinder, I know there's got to be a little bit of a shadow on that side. So when you're working with your references, sometimes you have to make changes, especially if you're trying to make things look three-dimensional, because a camera has a tendency to flatten an image. So as an artist, you have to kind of bring that back if you're trying to create dimensions. So I'm just going to wet this area here, and then I'm going to use that same color but softer. And I'm just gonna like put in a shadow, but I'm gonna kind of let the water do the mixing for me. So I'm not gonna worry about whether it's smooth or not. Well, hopefully you guys can see that. Might go just a tiny bit darker. There we go. Okay, now this is dry enough now where I can move on. So while that's drying, I'm going to work here. And what I want to do here is I want to create a lighter version of this blue. And really, all you need to do for that is to wet the area. Dilute this color a little bit. And then use it, right? It's just a different value of the same color. And keep it loose. So I am going to allow a little bit of that white to show up, even though there's not a lot of white in the photo reference. But I think the white kind of helps it pop. And then we need to make this area. I forgot that I had masking on there, so I need to bring this back, and then just let it fade to nothing, like so. Okay. Now on this side we have some of these greenish feathers, so I'm going to take this color here and add just a little bit of yellow to it, and then that's where these feathers are going to be. And again, I'm just blocking them in, and then we'll go back and add a little bit of shadows here and there to separate them. Now as you can see here where this color went over to red, how it changes, and that's alright. There we go. And a little bit more yellow here and there while it's wet. Not too much. And I need to bring in some of these colors over here as well. And gotta follow the cross contour, so these feathers are going this way, where these feathers were going this way. But keep them relatively loose. Oops, needs more yellow. Because it's just a suggestion, really, of these colors. I'm not trying to replicate this photograph, but I want to give a feel of all of the different colors that were in this bird. And these feathers are big right here, so I got to make sure that I don't let them get too small like the insulation feathers. So like those feathers up there. And then I'm just gonna clean and dry my brush and just fade this a little bit here where the colors are meeting each other. There we go. Alright. Flip this over real quick. Right here I said there's a shadow, and when we look at the reference, the feathers are doing this, so they get a little bit darker here, right here, kind of like coming out this way. So I'm going to go into the darker red, that same mixture that I started with earlier, which is the cadmium red light and the crimson, and I'm going to put it just above the shadow, that purple shadow. And then I'm just going to kind of use my brush to suggest some little strokes, some little feathers. And I'm allowing some of the color that's underneath to show through. I don't want to lose those colors. This feather is going that way. So this way. Only on the inner part, right? Because the highlight, I want that outer part to stay bright. So I'm only darkening up the inner part. I need to do the same thing here. This is going this way. So a little bit of the crimson just to darken up that mixture a little bit. I may throw a tiny bit of blue into it, I don't know. We'll see if this is dark enough. I think this might be dark enough. So just following the brush strokes, following the cross contours when I do the brush strokes here. And then as they go that way, towards the light, they get just a little bit brighter. Again, you don't want to lose the colors that are underneath, so allow some of those colors to show through. There we go. Fade them away. Alright. Now, right here, it goes over the eye, and then there's a shadow here. So right here, there needs to be a shadow. And that shadow is going to go, it's going to start there and it's going to fade up. So, start here. And remember, the shadows is not really dark. They don't have to be. It's just a darker value of what's already there. So sometimes my students want to make every shadow black. And the reality is, rarely is a shadow black. More often than not, it's just a little bit darker version of whatever color is already there. Okay, so here I'm just going to fade these up. Alright. Okay. Now I think I need to darken up this area even more. So, going back in to my burnt sienna. And ultramarine blue. And there's actually, I'm going to take a really close look at the reference material. There's actually a little bit of red in there also. So I'm going to reach in there, and I want the darker of the red. So to that mixture, I'm going to add a little bit of the crimson. Oops, got a little heavy there. There we go. Yeah, I like that a lot. Okay. Wipe off my brush and then fade it this way. I need to keep it dark here. And it looks like there should be a little bit darker area there as well. So I'm just going to glaze a little shadow right here. There we go. Wipe off the extra and then just touch and blend. There's a hint of blue on the beak. Right in this area here, like that bluish green color right there, and then it just fades into the white portion of beak. Kind of slides in there just a little bit. And then on this marking, this area here needs to be just a tiny bit darker. So sticking with that dark shadow color that I mixed. And this is just glazing. So I'm just basically adding little layers on top of what's already there. Alright, I'm going to dry this up, and then we are going to work on this part of the face a little bit. Alright, so we're ready to start working on this area right here. So what I did is I took a light pencil and just kind of made some markings. But if you look closely at the images, even though the lines seem to be going this way, the brush strokes are actually more diagonal. So these lines here are just basic guidelines, but we're actually not going to stick with them. We have to change the direction of the brush strokes ever so slightly. So I got to get my really small brush here, and it doesn't have to be a true red, but I'm going to use kind of mostly the alizarin crimson. Just put a little bit here, and I'm using just my zero brush. Making sure that I spin it to load it. There we go. Now here, I'm trying to keep my body out of the way. These little lines, they're kind of coming this way. So those are pretty easy. And they do have a little bit of curve to them. But you don't want to create stripes. You don't want to do that. Alright, it'll look kind of weird. Because you want to, you're putting in markings, but you're also suggesting the textures. Now here's where it kind of gets interesting. Even though these lines appear to go this way, the brush strokes are actually going to be diagonal. So tiny little brush strokes going this way, using the line as my basic guidelines, but the feathers, these little tiny feathers, are actually going this way. They're not doing this. We want to avoid that. And notice every time that I load the brush that I always spin it, because I got to make sure that I can produce these little fine effects here. And it's okay to allow some of the white to show up. It'll look more natural if you do that instead of just filling it all in. So if you do this, the flow is going to go this way, but the textures are going to be almost perpendicular. And then here, down there, there's just a little bit of a grayish, reddish grayish shadow. So I'm going to switch to my bigger brush, which is easier to create soft shadows with. I'm going to wet this area right here just a little bit. And then I want that reddish grayish color right there, just on the edge. Wipe off the extra and just fade it up just a little bit. So the highlight's actually here, not over there. And there's a little bit of that same color on this side as well. And this is small enough where I don't have to wet the paper first. Wipe off the extra and just fade that edge. In most cases, having a soft edge for a shadow will give you overall better look. Okay, we need to bring in a little bit more of the greenish color on the feathers. So, a little bit of a texture dry brush. If you look at the feathers though, like there's a lot of blue near the tips. So don't bring the green all the way down to the bottom. So I'm actually staying kind of away from the bottom quite a bit just to exaggerate that a little bit. Okay, it needs a little bit right there, just a little bit. Alright. So the next thing is the eye. The eye is super easy to do. We just get to use a really small brush. And there's kind of like a grayish little area. Let's go with this value right here. And what we get with the eye is simply this, is we have a really fine line here, but then here gets a little wider here. And it looks like the bottom here is a little wider than the top, so I'm just going to thicken this up just a little bit. And then the pupil. Looks like this extends forward just a little bit. Not much. And then a dark, nice, rich, dark color for the pupil. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to bring a little bit of color down here, dry it, and then just do a little bit of touch-ups, and then we'll be done. Alright, so we're just about done with this one. I'm going to add a little bit of gold to the eye, not too much. I'm going to throw in a few little shadows, and then we're going to call this one done. You can always continue to fine-tune it until you get it to the level that you want. But alright, so what I want to do for the eye is I want to make like a golden color, but I wanted to keep it mostly light. And the way that I want to do this is this. I'm going to take a little bit of water, I'm going to wet the area, I'm going to throw the color in, and then I'm actually going to remove a little bit of it, especially from the bottom where the light would be hitting it, to make it a little shinier. So, very little. Hopefully that shows up on camera. So I'll exaggerate a little bit more. And actually, this is not very dark, so I may not take anything out. But like if I wanted to, I could come in here with a wet brush and just kind of remove a little bit of the color just to keep it, just to give it a little bit of a highlight. And then once it dries, I can put a tiny little shadow there to indicate the ridge. Okay, I'm just going to show you a little bit more of the shadows, and then I want to call it done. So in between these areas here, we have to separate some of those, and that's done with the phthalo blue. I'm going to make it a little bit darker by mixing it with the regular blue. A tiny bit of red in there. And when I put these in, I want to follow the contours of the feathers, right? So I'm not going to go straight up and down. So like here, these are going in this direction. And then because these feathers are stacked on top of each other, there's going to be, and the light source coming this way, so there has to be a shadow underneath the feathers, especially on the lower rights. So pretty much that's all that there is to this. I'm just going to go through and pop in a few little shadows, do a little bit of detail work, and then we're going to call it done. So I hope you like this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. And as we're almost to the end of this series, and one of the things that we're going to do in future episodes is talk a little bit about what to do and how to protect your watercolors once you're done painting them. Alrighty. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next episode.